This presentation is delivered by the Stanford Center for Professional Development, providing graduate-level education to working professionals, online, on campus, and on-site.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Lessons in Decision Making. Today, it's our great pleasure to introduce David Leonhardi from Boeing. So David has been with Boeing since 1977. During this time, he's held a variety of positions ranging from wind tunnel model maker, developmental manufacturing shop manager, senior design to cost estimator, senior financial analyst, to currently acting as an executive consultant to corporate decision makers facing the need to create or renew their business unit strategies. He currently leads Boeing Commercial Airplanes Product Development Decision Consulting Group with projects that include strategic decision-making activities associated with future airplane product lines, collaborative business relationships, e-business strategies, new business development opportunities, and sustainability strategies. David's education includes serving a Boeing model maker's apprenticeship, an Associate of Arts degree in accounting, a Bachelor of Science degree in Organizational Management, a Master's degree in Project Management from George Washington University, an Advanced Project Management Certificate from Stanford, and an Executive Certificate in Strategy and Innovation from the MIT Sloan School of Management. He currently serves on the Informs Advisory Committee for the yearly Informs Practitioners Conference. He has been an invited speaker at MIT, University of Washington's Executive MBA program, Informs, and Product Development Management Association, and he's also an adjunct professor at Seattle University. Let's welcome David Leonhardi.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. First of all, thank you for inviting me down to come down and talk to you today. I came down from Seattle this morning, and fortunately, we have the same weather as you do down here. It's beautiful, and so it's awfully nice to come down to California. So what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to talk about applying decision analysis in a large organization inside of Boeing. And I got my start in decision analysis back in 1994. Been at it for quite a while. Came down to STG, got my training in decision analysis from STG, and I've been taking some of the classes that Ron Howard offers, you know, the Foundations for Professional Decision Analysis, the Stanford Decision and Risk, the Strategic Decision and Risk Management Certificate that's offered at Stanford. And so I've got quite a bit of education when it comes to decision analysis. But our thought for today's talk was to give you an actual real-life application of where it's been used. Because sometimes when you get into decision analysis, a lot of times people say, well, you know, that's something that you learn in school. It's awfully hard to apply it on an everyday basis, you know, or inside of a company. Well, I'm going to show you how we did that on the 787 Dreamliner. One of the things that I like to, when I'm teaching at Seattle U, I teach a decision analysis class. It's actually called Decision Making for Product Management. And one of the things I tell my graduate students is that decision analysis is a philosophy, and you can use it in any decision that you have to make. Okay, when I leave here, I'm going to get in my car and I'm going to drive back to San Jose Airport. Well, I have multiple decisions on how I can get there. Now, I understand what my frame is. I got to get to San Jose Airport by a certain time. I have certain objectives. I want to be on time. I want to be there for as far as maybe an hour or so before the flight. What different alternatives? I have multiple alternatives. I look for different information. So if you, I understand Carl Spetzer came in and talked about the 6 elements of decision quality. Well, you know, you walk through that process in formulating your decisions. You may not do it consciously, but you do walk through those different elements. And so I would challenge you, one of the takeaways I'd have for you, all of you who are thinking about decision making, is how can you use these different processes and tools in the different decisions that you have to go off and make, because I think that you can do it. I was earlier, we were having coffee. I have a daughter who's in the process of thinking about going to college in the next year or so. She's going to be doing some of her applications. She has been walking through a lot of the different decision quality elements while making decisions around which colleges does she want to apply to. So that's my spiel for you guys. I'm a decision analyst advocate. I'm a prophet. I like decision analysis. I use it in almost everything I do on a daily basis. And so without getting too farther down that bunny trail, I'm gonna start talking about the 787. And so the first thing I want to do is give you an overview of the business situation at the time of what was happening when we launched the 787. Then I want to go through some of the different processes and tools. Now I know that some of you may not have had any formal decision analysis training, so I'll give you just a real high-level cursory overview of some of the different processes and tools that we deployed. And then I'm going to give you a chronology of the activities, because it was a long time frame that we actually used these different processes and tools over while making some of the big decisions on the airplane program, and then conclude with some summaries and just some general observations that we had from this activity. So the first thing I want to, one of the things I want to preface before I get into the presentation is if you have any questions, just stop, holler them out, and I'll try to answer them as I'm going, okay? So, business situation at the time. Boeing had not launched a new airplane program in about 10 years. They launched the 777 airplane program, and it entered service in 1995. And you have to remember that on the 777 program, it was about a $10 billion investment. And the 787 program is probably, it's not going to be that high, but it's in the range of $6 to $8 billion right now. And you know, for any company to go off and launch that large of a decision, they really need to understand a lot of the uncertainties that this particular product's going to take and launch into. And the other thing about airplane products is they have a very long life cycle associated with them. I mean, you've got probably a 20-year clock speed associated with the airplane, because once you design the airplane and you get it out into the market, it's going to continue to operate for 20 to 25 years, and so there's a whole bunch of different types of decisions that are associated with the aftermarket servicing, keeping spare parts out there. So there's a lot of different things that are associated with launching new airplane programs. And so to launch a new airplane is a really big deal, and it's almost like a bet the company type of a decision every time you do it, because if you don't get it right, you've got all that investment and you get no payback on your investment. And so at the time we were looking at 787, we hadn't launched an airplane program since 1995, and 787 still hasn't flown yet. Hopefully it's going to fly sometime in June, by the end of June. And so we still have another year's worth of testing before we can actually deliver that first airplane to our customers. The other thing that was going on at the time was that we had two different types of business units inside of commercial airplanes. We have the business unit that actually builds the airplanes, and then we have a business unit that services the airplanes. Now, those two are really your profit and loss, your P&Ls, if you will. But you have another organization that's responsible for managing the supply chain, and that's our supplier management organization. And so when you launch a new airplane program like this, you have to try to get all of those stakeholders in line, make sure you have all the initiatives that people are working on so that you can get everybody moving in the same common direction as far as bringing out a new airplane program. The one thing that was interesting during the 787 program is that one of the profit and loss centers didn't even exist when we did the 777 program, and that was the Commercial Aviation Services business unit. And so there was a whole bunch of different dynamics associated with those different organizational leaders and what they wanted to try to accomplish with launching a new airplane. And the last thing internal to Boeing is that every time we do a new airplane program, you can imagine that there's a technology bookshelf, and as people are working on their projects and technology, they're waiting for the next new airplane to be able to put that new technology on. Because when you have an airplane that's been in production for a while, the technology has to buy its way on to the airplane program, and if it doesn't get a really good return because it's so expensive to implement it, then you don't get a chance to offer a lot of the new technology that's been developed over time. And so in this particular case, we had a lot of new technologies, especially around composite airplanes, that we wanted to take and roll out. And so this was kind of one of these different opportunities to be able to launch, to apply that technology. External to Boeing, we had a whole bunch of things that were happening at the time. You had the airline customers' business models were transforming, point-to-point type activities, low-cost business models. You had different, the different exogenous shocks, because remember, we launched this program back right around 2001, and it was right after 9/11. In fact, I can still remember one of our strategy offsites that we had with the leadership team was it was actually started the day of 9/11. Okay, and so there was a lot of different things that were going on at the time. Our supply chain is transforming. You have a lot of different. You have a lot of consolidations that are happening. The suppliers' business models are changing. They want to be able to move up the value chain. There's a very high level of design build type activities associated with the suppliers. So we wanted to be able to leverage that. And then also the air transportation system is transforming. You know, there's a whole bunch of activities going on around required navigational performance or performance-based navigation, because the air traffic management system is having a hard time with all the airplanes flying around. There was also limited connectivity associated with airplane flight. You know, you don't necessarily have the same internet connectivity. Now it's getting better, but at the time when we launched the 787, connectivity was very low, and so the question was, how can you actually enable the airplane to be able to get more information on and off the airplane to try to help with the different business models of the airlines. And there was a really big push to be able to create a networked system. And so in order to do that, once again, all these new technologies were trying to make their way onto the airplane. So before I get into some of the processes and tools that we used, I wanted to give you an idea of the different, kind of the schedule and the different types of decisions that you make when you're designing a new airplane. And so usually it's a 6 to 7 year time frame to design a new airplane. And you can see we start, do you have a new airplane concept? You have to go to the board of directors to get authority to offer it, to be able to go out to your customers and say, would you be interested in an airplane like this? Once you actually start to get their commitments, you can actually start designing it and see what your revenue stream is going to look like. Then you get into configuring the airplane. You get the first flight, and then you get certification and delivery. And you can see that there are a whole host of different types of decisions that you have as you're moving from the beginning of the airplane concept, the concept development, all the way through flight test into support and services. And what we were really interested in was really focusing on the upfront big decisions that we had associated with launching the airplane, because these will set the direction for the program over the next probably 10 to 15 to 20 years, especially when you start to look at what market are you going to target, what are the different performance characteristics going to be, how many features are you going to add to the airplane, what kind of risk do you want to take, the business architecture. This is, how are you going to design your supply chain, what are you going to take, how are you going to make your money as far as your business model, those types of things. So it was really important that we got this stuff set up front before moving into more of the detailed design work that goes into making the airplane. So, processes and tools. So when we started in on this activity, we were still wrestling with the whole issue of, is it a sonic cruiser, more faster airplane versus a more fuel efficient, less costly to operate airplane. And so we were working through that at the time. But then we also knew that we had a lot of organizational complexity. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, there were 2 major profit and loss centers that were involved, along with the supplier management organization, all with different levels of conflict or just different dynamics happening inside the organization. There was also a very high analytical complexity. We had to forecast markets that we would be launching the airplane into. We had a lot of different uncertainties around how much it was going to cost, new composite technology, how much is it going to cost to produce the airplane. And so there was in our particular case, we had high analytical complexity and high organizational complexity, so we settled in on a structured decision-making process so that we could get all the parties together to be able to talk through or have a dialogue around the different major decisions that we had to go off and make. This is the dialogue decision process. I don't know how many of you have actually seen this. This originates through at SDG, Strategic Decisions Group, and SmartOrg. And so, and the way we use it is that we have Boeing executives who comprise the decision board, because they usually don't have the time to be able to go off and work on some of these great big decisions. And then we have project teams that are off working on certain strategic decisions and what they do is they have a dialogue around analyzing these decisions based on the decision analysis processes and tools. And they go through and they make sure that, once they're assessing the situation, they make sure that do they have the right frame. They go back to their decision makers and they actually get approval of the frame so that you don't actually get down to making a recommendation and they say, well, you guys solved the wrong problem, because sometimes that can happen. And so we actually get the decision makers to approve the frame, develop the set of alternatives, have a dialogue around the alternatives to see if any of those alternatives can actually be weeded out. Once we have the alternatives, we evaluate the alternatives, make a recommendation. Once the decision makers make the decision, we'll put an implementation plan together, take it back to them for them to approve the plan, and then actually start to implement the plan. Now that's not a real, there's not a lot of rocket science to this, if you will, if you think through a process like that. But to get that dialogue to happen is a real challenge. And so the goal is to try to make sure you provide the right information or distilled information at certain points along the process. Okay, and it works very well. And in fact, this is what most of our major strategic decisions now inside of BCA use a variation or this particular process when we're taking it through and reviewing it and getting decisions made by our decision makers. You have a whole host of tools to support different steps along the way of the process. This is the decision analysis cycle, if you will. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on too many of the tools, but when you're structuring your problem, you have what's called a decision hierarchy. Decision hierarchy segregates the decisions into different areas. These are decisions that may have already been made, constraints, if you will. These are the strategic decisions, the direction-setting decisions that are in focus. And these would be more of the operational, tactical decisions on how would you go implement some of the different strategic decisions that you have to make. Strategy tables are around taking each one of the decisions as they're articulated in your decision hierarchy, putting them at the top of a column, articulating the different choices that you have for each one of the decisions, and then actually when you take and you pick a set of choices that you can actually start to articulate different alternatives that you have or intentions that you might have around your different alternatives associated with your decision-making activity. These work these are very effective in getting the right dialogue to happen. We use strategy tables on, I'd say probably maybe 90% of the big strategic decisions that we work on inside of the Boeing Commercial Airplane Group. Influence diagrams, this is actually what I'll call a graphical representation of the value, value map, if you will, associated with the different alternatives that you have. We use a piece of software, I think I have a slide coming up soon, that's called Decision Advisor. It allows us to build this value map up graphically. It encodes the Excel spreadsheet for you, which is your deterministic model, and it also allows you to do the different parameterizations associated with different maybe time series or different uncertainties that you may have associated with your evaluation model. A tornado diagram, I don't know how many of you have seen or heard of a tornado diagram. It's where you take and you actually put a range around some of the variables that you have inside of your analytical model to be able to understand what the particular range of outcomes might be associated with each one of those uncertainties. Decision trees, we don't spend a lot of time too much on decision trees other than understanding that you have a decision with multiple alternatives and the uncertainty associated or the expected value associated with each of the branches of your decision tree. Ranges of outcomes, we use these a lot in the different areas that we look at. Especially when we want to look at the risk associated with different alternatives against one another. These work very well. And then value of information and then decision quality. This is a slide on Decision Advisor. And this is, we actually use Decision Advisor to allow us to do rapid decision modeling. And what we'll do is we'll bring in a group of folks that is a certain project team, and they're in the process of trying to evaluate their different alternatives. And what we'll do is we'll have a workshop where the team will actually build their model out right in the workshop. We'll evaluate the different alternatives that we have, and then we'll hand the Excel spreadsheet and then the results of the workshop back to the team as they're leaving their workshop, so that they get real time. They have the real-time ability to be able to help analyze and put together their value model. And it works very well because you wind up alleviating this black box mentality of doing different types of analysis, and it allows them to really understand where the different value elements associated with their business case are coming from. And so it works pretty well to do that. Plus, it's also real time, and it gives them the ability to kind of have a little bit of fun, if you will, with the analysis piece. This is kind of a schematic of as far as how the software works. You start with an influence diagram. You build up the influence diagram with information inside of it that then gets encoded to an Excel spreadsheet. And from there, you can actually start to look at the sources of value in the evaluation. This is a waterfall chart, and it just basically talks about where you have inflows and outflows of cash, if you will, and what creates the net present value associated with the decision or the alternative. You can look at your uncertainties and also your range of outcomes. But the one thing I didn't mention was that you do have the ability to build in different decision tree logic, if you will, into the influence diagram, so that you can look at different alternatives against one another. Okay, so let's talk about the 787. So this was a really long time frame, and as I said, we started in around 2001, and at the time, the decision, the thought was, it's going to be one airplane versus another. We have a fast airplane versus a lower cost to operate airplane. And so when we originally started, we were very interested in trying to make sure that we had the right alternatives out on the table. And as you can see, we had two sets of activities going on starting in 2001 all the way down to 2004. And this was the authority to offer the 787, and we had to get that authority from the board of directors. And so all the information that was compiled out of this activity, the tornado charts, the different scenario modeling that we did, was actually used in the board of directors presentation. And so they had a pretty good idea of what types of uncertainties or different types of scenarios they may launch the airplane into. And that proved to be very, very helpful, especially in today where the airplane's a couple of years late. We actually looked at, I think, 9 different scenarios at the time, and I think 6 of them have actually come true. But the fact that we went through that analysis and got a bunch of information about it helped us to understand what might we do if those particular scenarios came true. And it worked very well from that standpoint. Okay, so starting point of the activity, we had to get sponsorship from the program leadership team. And this was a big challenge to do, because all of the folks that were on the leadership team were hand-selected to be on this leadership team to launch this new airplane program. And they had gotten there based on the types of activities that they, based on their past experiences as executives. So to bring in a new set of processes and tools, it was a little bit of a challenge, because every time we came in and talked to them, they, well, so what value is this going to add for us? And so one of the things that we did is we went off and started to look at different areas that we might be able to use the different decision analysis tools. But probably one of the biggest things that helped start to get people into the mindset of maybe trying to use this was getting different testimonials from executives who had already used them, and how much value that they got from having a more informed conversation around risk and uncertainty, making sure we really understood what the different alternatives were. And so as we were working through this, the initial focus became what we really want to do is go off and look at the program level set of strategic decisions and try to get all the leadership team engaged in this particular activity, because each one of the leadership team members had a set of sub-teams that were off working on various elements of designing and building the airplane. So once we got everybody's approval to go off and work through the decision analysis activity, we got the project commissioned, if you will. We started by taking each one of the members on the program leadership team and trying to get all their information that was in their head out onto the table so that we could start working with it. And what we found was that there were different types of initiatives going on in the commercial aviation services, airplane programs, supplier management, and those led to different types of decisions that we had to go off and look at. So we started by crafting a program-centric, if you will, decision hierarchy. These were the types of constraints that we were working with. There was a constraint in there around how big the airplane was, what was the market that we were going after, and in this particular case we were going after the middle of the market, as we call it, which is around a 200 to a 250 passenger size airplane. And so we couldn't go larger, we couldn't go smaller. I mean, that was one of the constraints that we had. And then there was also different types of safety elements that we wanted to do, that we were dealing with. There was also technology advances that we were dealing with. So those were some of the constraints that we had. The decisions that we were having, that we had to work with, you started to talk about what is the airplane configuration, how are we going to sell the airplane, what kind of business model did we want to have around the airplane. Because remember, this is setting the course for the next 15 to 20 years worth of airplane production. And so these were the big direction-setting decisions that we were wrestling with. And then we also had different decisions around, how would we market this airplane? What would be the technology development path? Depending on what we decided up here, these decisions here would start to drive the decisions that you found down in the more tactical, operational type decisions that we've articulated in our decision hierarchy. We created the program strategy table. Yes, sir.
You list as one of your decisions the airplane configuration. Like, what kinds of alternatives go into a decision like that?
Great question. So you could envision a sonic cruiser, flies faster, okay, higher, faster, gets passengers there fast in a very quick manner. Maybe one that was more cost-effective for the airlines to operate, because flying faster costs a little bit more money, right? Down to a derivative product. We had a 767 airplane that's about the same size, looks pretty good, just needs to be maybe upgraded with engine technologies, maybe take some weight out of the airplane, different types of manufacturing processes. So this was really the configuration of the airplane. As you started to get into areas of technology, you could say you have a metal airplane, plastic airplane, combination of the two. And so and this has been disguised for a little bit of confidentiality purposes, but we were we tried to be very mutually exclusive on each one of the decisions that we had articulated, and it worked pretty well from that standpoint. Did that answer your question? Okay. And the one thing that I will say is that, in fact, it's on the next slide. These decisions are very complicated, and so in the airplane configuration piece, we actually used a concept called nested strategy tables. And so what we did is we took this particular column of the strategy table and we made an airplane strategy table. So when you start to talk about configuration, you start to talk about, okay, would it be new engine technology? Would it be, how fast would it fly? How far would it fly? How much cargo would you have on board? So there was a bunch of different other types of decisions that made up this strategic choice. Okay. Now the best part about doing this was that you had an organization of probably 600 or 700 people at the time working on this airplane, and it allowed them to understand the different alternatives that we were looking at and how those different alternatives started to fit in with the program level directions or alternatives that we were looking at, okay? And so it worked out very well, and we had a strategy table for each one of the different columns associated, and just to drive down more into more detail associated with that particular column, okay? So once we had our strategy tables built, we went out to the different organizations, the airplane programs, the commercial aviation services, the supplier management folks, and we had a really rich dialogue with them around what we were thinking about. And the great part about it was that we had defined each one of the choices that we had, so we had a clear definition of what those meant. And then we also had the different alternatives, so we could go talk to the different folks around, so what do you think, what don't you think, is this within reason or not, right? Yes, sir.
The higher level column, the alternatives on the column. I mean,
yeah. So these particular choices right here, these choices are in this particular column of the strategy table. Okay, and so when you start to think about airplane configuration, well, what decisions do you have in airplane configuration? Well, you have range, you have how much payload is it going to have, what type of manufacturing technology are you going to use, or what type of materials technology?
The top table, I suppose, has been kind of like the strategy version, and then you're just showing the path towards that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yep. Any other questions? I thought I saw another hand. Okay. When we went out and we had these conversations with the rest of the organizations, what became clear to us is that we had picked the wrong frame at the time, because we were just looking at the airplane. Okay, we got to get the airplane out. We got to build the airplane. We're going to build it, in the same organizational structure that we have, those types of things. And what became clear is that the Boeing commercial airplane groups, the executive leadership team, was more interested in trying to not only come out with a new product, but try to evolve our business model at the same time. And so one of the things that they were very interested in is us taking a step back, looking at how we're playing in our business model, because there's producing airplanes, and then there's kind of the flight services. How do you actually service all the ongoing flights that are happening across all the airlines? There's the airplane maintenance, repair, and overhaul, and then there's technical service of modifying airplanes or doing different types of support services or those types of things. And there was also this issue of information management and connectivity that they wanted woven into it. And so they told us to take a step back, and if we were to look at it from this particular point of view, how would our decision hierarchy change? And what it did is it changed. We still had the airplane configuration, but then we started to think about more around, so what product, so what market are we going after? What's our strategic control point around trying to maintain the different profits that we think we could get? What would our products and service offering look like? It changed the types of decisions that we were wrestling with. Now, we created a new strategy table along with the new set of nested strategy tables, and it did result in completely different thinking that I don't think would have happened had we not had this dialogue, this ongoing dialogue around all these the major decisions that we were trying to go off and make. While we were doing the strategy table work, we had to figure out how we were going to analyze these new business models we were looking at, because one business model said we would never sell new airplanes again. We would just provide available seat miles on a revenue basis for an airline. So an airline would not have to buy an airplane. And that just threw all of our financial models into a state of chaos, because they couldn't really stop to think about how would you evaluate something like that. And so we wound up building a high-level decision-making model that was able to look at a whole bunch of different options that we were looking at, but we had to reconcile it against the financial business case models, and at the time that was about 40 megabytes worth of spreadsheets. And so you could almost envision an Excel-based model that you had monthly cash flows for 20 years. And how would you go rapidly reconfigure that to be able to look at a scenario where you're never going to sell an airplane? It's a real challenge to do. And so while we were doing the framing activities around the strategy tables, we were building up this influence diagram, or this analysis model, to be able to take and get something that we could have these workshops around, where we could bring people in and help us analyze the different alternatives we were looking at. So once we got that done, we started holding the different workshops with all the different organizations, the marketing organizations, the engineering organizations, the business development folks. We brought them in, and what we did is we picked two bookends on our alternatives. And one of them, I said, was that we would never sell an airplane, and then the other one was more of a traditional business model of how, what would that look like. And then we went through and we took and got all the people in a room, and over a series of probably about a month period of time, we went through and created the analysis, and we were able to look at the risk and uncertainty associated with the two different alternatives. And what we wound up doing was creating kind of a hybrid business model. And the new business model that we came out with was an aftermarket service called Integrated Materials Management, where you do not have to pay for all the spares and all the different parts associated with keeping an airplane flying. You just pay on a dollar per flight hour basis for access to a spares pool, if you will. Okay. And then the other one was what we call Gold Care, and that would be providing all your aftermarket support associated with keeping the airplane flying. If any of you have a Lexus, it's kind of the Lexus support package, if you will, same type of a concept. And so we've rolled out those two new business offerings, and so far, the airplane hasn't delivered yet, but we have a high level of interest in both of those different offerings. So in order to get ready for the board of directors presentation, the executive leadership team was really, they had picked one alternative, but they wanted to feel a little bit better about that alternative. And so what we did is we went through and we developed a process for looking at scenarios and developing different scenarios that the airplane could launch into. And so through that, we developed the different alternative scenarios. We went through and we held scenario workshops to come through and see which part of the business model would change. And then we went through and we struck a line, if you will, of what the baseline business case was. And then we showed, based on each one of the scenarios, what could happen to the business case associated with launching the airplane program. And this worked out very well, because when the board of directors was having a conversation about is it the right time to launch the airplane or not, they could look through the different scenarios, and if they didn't see one of their major scenarios here, they could one, come back and ask us to run a particular scenario, but two, if we'd articulated what was on their mind, they at least had an idea of how bad or how good the business case might be, depending on the scenario that materialized. We also did some multi-attribute type decision making. And this is where we looked at different benefits or objectives that we had, different risks that we wanted to avoid, if you will, launching the program. We went through and we prioritized the risks and also the benefits, and then we looked at our alternatives in relationship to those prioritized risks or objectives and risks. And then we were able to take and combine that into understanding how well the different alternatives satisfied our objectives or avoided the risks that we might face going and launching the airplane. This was, once again, to be able to go off and give the decision makers just a little bit more confidence around, this is the alternative we picked, this is what we're thinking that is a good, is the right way to go. And so this worked pretty well to be able to give them a little bit more confidence around the alternative that they had come up with. Okay, so summary and observations. Encouraged innovative thinking. I can't stress this one enough, because if you don't have a forum for having these conversations, it's really hard to get that innovative thinking out on the table and to incorporate it into your decision making. And it really challenged a lot of our conventional paradigms. When we said we were not going to sell the airplane, the marketing organization just about tilted. They said, you can't do that. I You say, well, why not? You know, and we, through having this kind of focused dialogue, if you will, we were able to get those paradigms out on the table and to challenge those paradigms. Provided a forum for having strategic conversations between the BCA organizations. If we would not have had the dialogue process in place to be able to go out and have those conversations, we would have had a very program-centric look on our decision making. We would have just been focused on the airplane. There's a chance that we may not have come up with those 2 new service offerings had we not had those types of conversations. The one thing that happened, and this is why a heavy sigh, a lot of the executive leadership team on the 87 has kind of moved on into other higher level areas of responsibility inside of the commercial airplane group. Well, they are very interested in deploying these types of concepts and tools along with portfolio management type processes and more thought processes across their organizations. And so we're seeing a tremendous pull for understanding how can I use strategy tables, how can I actually look, you know, how do I model some of this risk and uncertainty. So we're getting a lot of traction across the rest of the organization. And I think it's because a lot of these executives have moved into different types of roles in the organization. Scenario formulation has become a recognized element. In fact, a lot of the larger, I'm working on a long-term product strategy associated with which should be the next new airplane, and we are doing multiple scenarios now of what types of competitors might be out there, what would be competitive responses to new airplane types, should we do just a derivative airplane, new airplanes. So scenario analysis, scenario formulation is recognized as something that you need to have in order to get robust decision making. One of the things that a lot of times people gloss over when it comes to some of these types of activities is that if you do the analysis right, you get the right information out in the activity, you can use that to take and formulate risk and opportunity mitigation plans. And so if you see that one of your uncertainties on your tornado chart is controllable, and you understand how much downside there is, you know which ones to focus on, especially the ones at the top of your tornado chart, around putting together a mitigation plan in order to make sure that the downside doesn't happen. Or opportunity plans to ensure that maybe the upside, you might be able to harvest the upside. And so it tells the teams which different variables or uncertainties they should be thinking about, and how do you put your, how much value your plans might have associated with managing those uncertainties. Lessons learned, you have to have sponsorship from all levels in the organization, and the one thing that it's easy to get, it's kind of easy to get it from on top because, oh yeah, better decision making is always a really good thing, but it's really the lower level of the organization that's even more important, because they're the ones who will help you in all these different activities, and if they don't buy into this, then it's going to be awfully hard for you to try to go off and actually use these types of processes and tools out there, because you get a lot of pushback from the people that you have to go off and work with. You must embed these tools and processes into the business practices of the organization. And one of the things that I've seen, I get a lot of calls to go in and help people with making very hard, complex decisions. And one of my first criteria when I go in and talk to a lot of the different folks is that they need to provide me with resources who will be resident when I leave to be able to take these processes and tools and skills and keep them going. And the reason you want to embed them in the business processes is because, one, that'll provide the motivation to provide the skills to be able to have this happen, and two, it'll also provide the motivation for them to use the information that they get out of a set of processes and tools that are provided through the decision analysis process. Now, the last thing is that all assumptions must be articulated and documented. And the reason I say that is because that's where the real strategic conversation will happen. When we were talking about our assumptions around, what would a business model with where we don't ever sell the airplane, why would that work? It was the assumptions that we had as a team talking about, you know, the leasing companies and how they have a business model that already does this, that enable us to have these really strategic conversations around, is that the type of manufacturer that we really want to be when it comes to commercial airplanes? So with that, I think that's it. So I can open it up to any questions or comments that you might have. Yeah.
So how did you take into account like second order customer demands? It sounds like you're selling primarily to airline companies or airlines. Right. So let's say the airlines have some metric that they want to see one way. Like let's say they want shorter distances between seats. Mm-hmm. But you're kind of worried to say that, well, if all Boeing airplanes have that shorter distance, then we can end up losing a lot of share to Airbus down the road, 5-10 years from now, if the customers that are flying those planes start switching to airlines that fly Airbus.
Yep.
So how do you kind of control for those conflicting situations where you have like a first order customer asking one thing and a second order customer asking another? Or like,
Great question. Great question. We did probably 2 years worth of research on the flying passenger, the ultimate customer in our particular view. And we went out and surveyed customers around the world, asking them, can you really differentiate a Boeing versus an Airbus? Most people would say no, because you walk down the gate plane or the taxiway or the jetway, get on the airplane, you really don't know unless you see Boeing or Airbus on the side, right? And so we were very interested in being able to understand what would make flying better for the passenger. Established differentiation. And we actually did some things on the airplane, larger windows, different open space, higher humidity. That was actually a direct result of a lot of those different types of customer engagements that we did. And then we went back to the airline saying, this is what we found, because they don't have the money to be able to go off and do that. And so we went back to them, and we were working with a set of launch customers at the time, being very transparent about what we were finding. Worked very well to be able to go off and do that.
So is it you were able to support demands to the first order customers and say that you have the numbers to back that up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the 87 has sold around 900 airplanes. It's the fastest selling airplane in aviation history, commercial aviation history.
Right.
So.
Hi, Dave.
Jim.
Great
Hi, Jim.
presentation.
Thank you.
What about the suppliers? I know Boeing has had trouble with suppliers.
Yeah.
Did you look at different supplier relations or configurations that way in the process?
We did. And we have had we've had some challenges with our suppliers, and I think that one of the things that happened to us is we went off and we picked the suppliers that we really wanted to work with, and I think one of the big challenges that we had was really kind of understanding their level of expertise and how far their design capabilities or their manufacturing capabilities, how far they'd progressed. And so we tried to take, in fact, a couple of our scenarios was around what would happen if maybe the suppliers had problems, right? And we tried to take that into consideration, but there's only so much information you can find. But we did try to take all that into consideration when we were designing our supply chain architecture, if you will. Did that answer your question? Yeah?
Were you prepared for some of the problems you ended up facing?
I would say they took us by surprise, but we were prepared. It just cost us a little bit more money to take care of some of the problems. And probably where we had the biggest issue was some of the suppliers didn't necessarily come clean on where they were having problems at the time. And it wasn't until we brought the first airplane into the factory that we had a really good visualization of the problems that they were incurring and how we could go off and help them.
A supersonic airliner in the next 20 years?
Do I think we'll see one?
Yeah.
I do think we'll see one. And it may not be in commercial aviation, but I think you'll see one in a business jet. There's a lot of people out in that market right now looking to be in that market. The biggest problem, until we can get there's a propulsion. The faster you fly, the more fuel it takes to fly, or that fast, right? And until they can get past that fuel consumption issue, I don't think it'll come on the horizon, because when we were looking at the Sonic Cruiser, a lot of the customers were very interested in it, but the next question they had was, so what's the fuel consumption of that airplane? And as fuel prices continue to rise, until we find some sort of maybe a sustainable biojet fuel or something that will actually play into keeping the fuel prices down, I think it'll be a challenge for that to happen. I'm sorry?
How bigger is the fuel consumption compared to a commercial airliner of a supersonic one?
Boy, I can't. I'm not an engineer by trade, so all I know is that it was the view at the time when we launched the 787 is they were very interested in trying to control their costs. And if you look at the cash airplane related operating costs of an airplane, you have it used to be probably 2 years ago that the flight crew was the most expensive piece of the pie of flying the airplane. Last year, fuel became the largest piece of the pie. And so we have to work through what is that going to look like with future airplanes. Yeah.
To integrate the decision analysis process into the lower level organization. So I wonder how you teach these tools to the organization. It's a big company.
Good question. So when I go in, I've tried since I've been doing it for a while at Boeing. We've tried having classes, formal classes where we bring people in. That works, hit and miss sometimes. I mean, you'll create a really good awareness, but you may not get an actual practitioner, And so what I try to do whenever I go in on a project is I try to figure out who's going to be on the project team, try to get the actual practitioner, and then what I'll do is kind of tutor them as I go along, right? And so they actually see the concepts in work, and they actually see the software working, and really trying to understand it from that standpoint. Now, with that being said, I have a group of 8 people, and we're starting to get some demand around decision analysis classes, because people are, when people go to an executive team, they say, I want to see your strategy table. Oh my gosh, where's strategy table? Well, they just can't call Dave. We want to be able to create the resident knowledge inside of an organization so they can actually create their own. And so one of the things we've been doing is trying to get people into the Stanford Strategic Decision and Risk Management certificate classes. But we're now looking at a way to try to bring in 1 or 2 of the classes into Boeing so that we can start trying to get more and more folks up to speed on the decision analysis processes and tools. I see a question back there.
I noted that your project is 7 years in time span at least, and given the delays, it's been stretching more than that. And the Dreamliner is probably going to be in commission for at least 20 years, I believe.
Well, we hope that it's 20 years.
And given that the fact that you started your decision making in 2001, and a lot of the political climate has changed in the last 8 years. Previously, we didn't know that there was this phenomenon known as peak oil, and now it's become very apparent that it's peaked and it's passed. How, I guess, in strategy analysis, strategic analysis, it's basically making a decision under very uncertain terms. Sometimes you might come to a decision set that's not optimal. No, that might be optimal in the initial start point, but given such a long span of project, you might start to see it not being the optimal solution, somewhere in the midpoint. I guess, how do you see yourself as resuscitating or rescuing it from the wrong trajectory?
The Dreamliner, or something more generic. Well, I think that in strategy work, once you develop a strategy, you're not done. You always go back and revisit the strategy, right? At least in my opinion. Now, with this big of an investment, you have to make sure you have you're going in the right trajectory, right? Some of the things that we've been doing, because I happen to agree with you, I think we are past peak oil. But some of the things that we are doing right now is we're really trying to incubate the whole industry around sustainable biojet fuels. Not the first generation, we're talking more second and third generation type biojet fuels, or biofuels. And so that is how we're hopefully going to try to keep that, let's say the 787, going in the right trajectory, right? There are some things that are just beyond your control. And so by those, you'll just have to take a look at where you're at in that particular point in the future and try to make your decisions at that point, right? And just don't get kind of trapped in this sunk cost type mentality, you know, and don't let that trap you into something going forward.
Case that many big organizations like GM, Ford, and Chrysler are stuck in this singular path that they can't seem to deviate from. And like, I was wondering if it's just a default behavior characteristic of big organizations, or it can actually be mediated by. I think it's
a behavior that organizations can get into. I'm hoping that Boeing is not. At least the executives that I'm interacting with, they're always trying to look forward, and hopefully that's not the default behavior that we're falling into. And so. I think we're getting cut off.
We have a tape, another class.
Okay.
But please feel free to talk to Dave after this.
Yeah, you bet. And I can provide Somik my email address, and so if you have some questions, you know, feel free to email me. I'd be happy to set up a dialogue through email or something like that. So, all right.